Hello, my name is Rainer Hanekamp. This is Engineer News with the latest updates from the Angular community every week. Doug Parker was guest at the Angular Meetup Graz, which this time had more the format of a podcast with host Manfred Steyer. Doug is a member of the Angular team, is responsible for the CLI, and they discussed Micro Frontends at Google. A little bit of context. Google is using a monorepository, which means all their code is in a single repository. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not using micro frontends. In fact, this has already been reported in Engineer News. We know that Google's Cloud Console is based on a huge micro frontend architecture, which is using iframes under the hood. That approach is not valid anymore.
Iframes actually were the solution that Cloud Console used. They wanted to move away from that, both for performance reasons and because a lot of the magic that gets built into it, where you would say like document.create element in one app would actually proxy that message to a different app and then create a div on that app and then like send a reference back to the original one.
Google's approach is to see micro frontend as contracts between the apps. So a micro frontend is implementing a certain interface and the infrastructure is taking care of the integration. For sharing logic or services, they use protocol buffers.
For the most part, we don't want people just passing object references from one app to another because it is generally a very unsafe thing to do and it's very easy to change that object such that you shoot yourself in the foot. You wouldn't pass a direct reference to user service itself, but instead user service would be an abstraction on top of this that's sort of creating a remote procedure call, an RPC mechanism. And then it's just that each one is responsible for serializing, deserializing those correctly, and then responding to those messages.
There are no plans to open source their solution once it is done. And at the end, Doug answered a very critical question, namely when to use micro frontends.
What are the core problems you're trying to solve? Can you solve those more directly? And if you can, you probably should. That more direct solution is almost always the better approach in my mind. Do you have any like hard UX requirements for this? Do we actually need organizationally for these teams to not be talking to each other? Because fundamentally, you can create this architectural boundary between the two, but if the teams need to be talking to each other, then they need to be doing that regardless of what your architecture is. You can scale a team of 5 people with one monolith. And so at a certain point, there's a certain number of engineers and a certain amount of lines of code where that stops being true. That boundary is a lot larger than you think it is.
Last year, TypeScript announced that they are going to rewrite their compiler in Go. That should bring a performance improvement by an order of magnitude, so 10 times. For obvious reasons, such an undertaking takes time and of course occupies all their resources. Pushbase posted now an update on the current progress. The upcoming version, TypeScript 6, will be the last one written in TypeScript. The Angular team follows and has already started to make their code base ready for version 6 as well. The Angular DevTools provide a visualization of the signal graph. The latest version received an update and now gives a much better view on the resource, which is in the end just a group of different signals belonging together. Last but not least, ticket sales for Ang India, India's largest Angular conference, have started. And again, if you're organizing a conference, please let us know so that we can promote it here. And that's it. I wish you a nice weekend. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.